This is a PC. Well, it's not a PC yet, obviously. It's a bunch of parts in boxes, but it will be a PC very soon. That's what we're gonna do. We'll build them into a PC. That's why we're here. Oh god, I'm so awkward. Hello, hi there, I'm TechDweeb, welcome. Thank you for clicking on the video. So today we're gonna build a PC. Why am I building a PC? Why not build a PC? Building PCs is freaking fun, man. The real reason I'm building this is a buddy of mine wants a PC, and he asked me if I could make him one. Specifically, he wants a PC that doesn't cost too much and can play Elden Ring. I have a bunch of parts that I bought on a Boxing Day sale and I never got around to using, so I figured why not build a PC out of them. The case I'm especially excited about. You'll see why when I get to that. And it's not just because of their amazing gamer branding. So the theme of this build is just a basic budget build, maximum performance in the $400-ish price range. That's about what all this stuff costs. Here you can see it all on the screen right now, the breakdown. I converted the prices to USDs, by the way. I live in Canada, but most of the internet seems to speak in USDs, so that's what I go with. And we'll see how we did, what kind of Elden Ring performance we can get out of this budget. And we'll try some other games too, I guess. So with all that out of the way, let's quit wasting time and build a PC, shall we? Starting off, of course, with our motherboard. This is an ASRock B450M Pro 4. Super cheap, especially with a mail-in rebate from Newegg. Micro ATX, socket AM4. This will work with nearly any AM4 socket CPU that you'll be buying for a budget build. Honestly, its main feature, and the reason that I bought it was because it's the cheapest B450 motherboard that I could find. And it'll do the job nicely. This comes with our SATA cables that we will need because we're going with a SATA SSD today. And our I/O shield, obviously. And the motherboard itself. I actually do like the look of this motherboard. It's got some nice aesthetic touches, and it's nice that we get some decent VRM heatsinks on the MOSFETs, even on the cheaper boards now. I'm seeing this more and more, even on the cheap boards, and I like it. Decent chipset heatsink too, that's good stuff. And the CPU that we're going to be using is the Ryzen 5 4500. This CPU was super cheap right around Christmas. I bought most of these parts all on a Boxing Day sale, by the way. Boxing Day is like Canadian Black Friday. This was just 80 bucks when I bought it. This is an amazing CPU for 80 bucks, in my opinion. We're talking 6 cores, 12 threads, with a 4.1 GHz boost clock, and it comes with a Wraith stealth cooler, which is a great cooler. Plenty good enough to handle this 4500. I'll include links to all this stuff in the description below, by the way, if you want to pick up any of these components yourself. Alright, let's get this CPU installed. Shove that in the CPU hole, just like that. Give it a little sensual rub to get it warmed up, and then lock it down with the handle so that it can't get away. We're going to use the included Wraith stealth cooler. Now, this did come with thermal paste pre-applied, but I already used this cooler on my Ryzen 5 5800X while I was waiting for a replacement cooler after my AIO died. But if you buy this processor, it'll come with thermal paste pre-applied. Today we're going to use my favorite Noctua NTH1 thermal paste. I like it because the tube looks like a can of root beer. Lately I've been going with the 4-dot method of thermal paste application. I think this gives better coverage than my single blob method. Sound off in the comments, what's your favorite way to apply thermal paste? Oh darn, I just realized that this cooler uses screws, not clamps, and the motherboard has the AM4 mounting bracket clamp, so I'll have to take that off. There we go. And the cooler goes on, screw it down, all nice and snug. On to the RAM. We're using 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4 kit, clocked at 3200 megahertz. You see here that it says it was made for Intel? Yeah, we're going to ignore that. It'll work fine with our AMD processor, trust me. And in we go, in the furthest socket from the CPU, socket 4, and then skip a socket, and then put in the second stick into socket 2. If you're not familiar with how this works, this is how the sockets are linked. 2 and 4 are linked so that both of our sticks can sync and run in dual channel mode. If you're not in dual channel mode, then you're leaving some performance on the table. That's my RAM lesson for you today. And that's our motherboard basically done. We don't have an NVMe drive for our M.2 slot since we're going with a SATA drive today. So there's nothing else that we need to worry about here. And now we can get started with our case, I think. This part I'm really excited about, and you'll see why in a minute. I love this case for one reason. I mean, it's not a good case. I've built in it before, actually. My first ever case swap was in this exact case. But there is one thing I really like about it that's got me excited. It sort of set the theme for the whole build. Alright, there it is. And now you're probably thinking, TechDweeb, that's a super cheap looking kind of cheesy case. Why'd you buy that? Well, 2 reasons. 1, yes, it was cheap. And 2, does this answer your question? Oh, you guys know me. I just freaking love orange things. And there's even a couple of orange LED fans in there too. Oh, I'm excited. Orange things just get my juices flowing, you know? Alrighty, let's open this thing up. So, for the power supply, I'm going with this Asa Pizzazz 650 watt, 80 plus bronze, non-modular power supply that I bought because it was cheap. And there was a mail-in rebate. You know, that's going to be a theme with this build, if you haven't noticed. I bought the cheapest stuff that was actually good, with the goal of building a super affordable gaming PC. I'll be mounting the power supply with a fan pointing down to keep that hot air from blowing on the GPU, since it's a bit of a smaller case. Alright, time to put in the motherboard. There we go. Nice and careful. Oh, damn it. Hang on, I forgot the IO shield, as usual. There we go. Welcome to your new home, little guy. So that's done. Motherboard secured in there. Power supply. Now, before we do anything with the cables, I'm gonna put in the drives because those will also have cables that we'll need to deal with. So let's do that now. For our large storage drive, we have a 2GB 3.5-inch SATA hard drive. This is a good amount of storage for a budget build. And this will get locked down here in the hard drive bay. This sled is supposed to kind of clamp on the sides, lock into the screw holes. There we go. And that just slides in. Our system drive is going to be this 256GB silicon power SATA SSD. Again, but because it was cheap, 256 is the bare minimum of what I choose for any build, but it'll be just fine for this setup. Let's just carefully remove this from the packaging, delicately, and this just slides into these little mounting brackets on the case and gets secured with a couple of screws. But first, I'm gonna plug the SATA power cable and the SATA data cables into these things because it's gonna be tight to work on in there after they're installed. Easier to do it now. And while we're plugging things in, let's do the USB 3.0 connection for the USB ports on the front of the case. As for the CPU power cable, there's really no easy access point for that to come through near the CPU on the case, which is super annoying. I hate when cases do that. But we do have space along the top of the motherboard, so I'm just gonna route it up there and tuck it in. That'll be fine. And then we'll do the motherboard power connection. Good stuff. Nice and tidy. What's next? Maybe the rest of the front panel connectors. Yeah, let's do those. We have the USB 2 connection and the HD audio connection. Keeping those cables nice and tidy as we work. And we'll do our system panel connections. I always need to look up the diagram for this. I can never remember what goes where. And, well, I think that's all the main stuff that we need to deal with right now. So let's do the case fans real quick. They could be plugged into the system fan header at the bottom. They daisy chain together. And onto the cable management. This part I usually really like doing, but it was actually super awkward in this case. There aren't many mounting points, and this non-modular power supply had a bunch of extra SATA, Molex, and PCIe power connectors that need to be bundled up and tucked away. And then the door didn't fit on, so I had to take it all apart and do something else with the big chalky motherboard power cable. This actually took me like 15 minutes, which is very long for me. I could usually get this done in just a few minutes, but whatever. All's well that ends well. Oh, and I have one more surprise for this build. I bought these orange LED strip lights. These are magnetic, and they just stick on to the inside of the case. And then they can be daisy chained together and are powered by a single Molex connection. I'm hoping that this adds even more orange goodness to our orange and black themed build. And now, everyone's favorite part of the build, GPU time. For the GPU here, I'm using this quote-unquote new 8GB RX 580 that I bought off AliExpress. I put new in quotes because the actual GPU of this card isn't new, it's refurbished or salvaged. I reached out to the seller and I asked them about that, and they said that the GPU is the only part that's salvaged, but like the board and the memory chips are all new, so that's good. I did a review of this GPU recently on my channel. I'll link to that in the description below if you want to see how it does, and I'll include this in the product links below if you want to buy one. I think it's a fantastic price for this GPU. I was super impressed at how well it did. And it's like under 70 bucks. Kinda crazy actually. Anyways, with that installed, are we done? Yeah man, that's it. We're freaking done. Not looking too bad if I do say so myself. Nice and tidy. No really ugly components that stick out. For a budget build, having it look cool is kind of a bonus, and this looks great to me. Robbie right now looks purple in the B-roll, but that's just my purple lights. It's gonna look very orange in a minute. Speaking of which, let's get this thing set up and see if we get a post. And I won't leave you in suspense. Yeah, it posted. First try. Not bad at all. And yeah, that's looking pretty orange. I guess those lights are kind of more yellow than orange. They're supposed to be orange. That's disappointing. We'll see what it looks like in a minute with the cover on though. So here in the BIOS, you can see we have our B450M motherboard, a Ryzen 5 4500 processor, two 8GB sticks of RAM, but it's only clocked at 2133 MHz by default. That's because we need to enable XMP. That'll be right over here in the overclocking settings. We'll set the XMP profile 1. There we go, 3200 MHz now. Nice. So we have a post, all our hardware is detected, which means that it's time to install Windows. I have the Windows installer on a USB stick. So I'll just go through the installation process, get it all up and running, and then we'll install some games. Just a couple games. I don't want to be here all day or anything. Like I said, this PC is for my buddy, and he wants to play Elden Ring, so obviously we gotta test that. I'll come back in a bit when this is all ready. And here we are, a few hours later. I have Windows 10 fully installed, updated, all my drives installed. We're good to go. See, here we are with our processor, the Ryzen 5 4500, 6 cores, 12 threads. And our RAM, as you can see, is 16GB running at 3200 megaflops. Our 2GB storage hard drive, and our 256GB system SSD drive, and our GPU, the Radeon RX 580 2048 SP. Oh, speaking of which, here's the AMD software showing the latest drivers. I just installed the standard RX 580 drivers from the AMD website. Good to go with this. No overclocking tools or anything, but that's about what I expected from a cheap, sorta off-brand GPU like this. No headroom to speak of. I'm not worried about the performance though. Now, speaking of the performance, I guess it's time to do some gameplay tests. Yeah, let's do that. I can't build a PC and then not show you how it performs, right? So let's do that now, shall we? Before we get into the gaming, I wanted to do a quick Cinebench run. I've never used the Ryzen 5 4500 before now, and I kind of wish I had more time to spend with it because I think it's actually a really interesting CPU. It's kind of an oddball. It's like the most modern Zen 2 architecture AMD CPU, I think, but it launched alongside a bunch of Zen 3 CPUs. I remember seeing speculation that the 4500 was just old stock that AMD just didn't get around to releasing for whatever reason. And it's also likely that this 4500 was meant to be a 4500G since it's the same specs and the same architecture, but just with a bad G portion of the chip. I mean, who knows with these things? We do know that we have 6 cores, 12 threads, decent boost clock of 4.1 GHz, but its main drawback is that it only has 8 MB of L3 cache. The Ryzen 5 5500 is available now as well, and it has nearly identical specs, except that it has 16 MB of L3 cache. We got a 9118 multi-core score in Cinebench R23, by the way. Very respectable at this price point, in my opinion. Better than a 12100F, which is around this price if you can find it on sale. I'd love to be able to test this out some more in a variety of games to learn more about it, but alas. This CPU is destined for my buddy's house to allow him to adventure maidenless in the lands between. Alrighty, onto some gaming. Starting off, as always, with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I'm running at 1080p with the high settings, actually, and it's looking very nice indeed, as it always does. But it's running great here. We're at the high settings, and we still managed to get 59 FPS on average. I mean, that's great, considering the price of this whole setup. 360 USDs before tax. That's some pretty awesome performance for this price, I think. Considering that we're using all new parts, and the Ryzen 5 4500 is holding up quite well, actually. Yeah, look at that. We're hovering between 25 and 40% CPU utilization. Yeah, this isn't the most CPU intensive game or anything, but we're not even close to being bottlenecked here. And seeing how this game ran on this GPU on my other system with the 10400 is basically the same here. Which means that my buddy will have some room to upgrade that RX 580 down the line with something more powerful. And I'll have to worry about upgrading his CPU right away. Or if he does eventually need to upgrade that CPU, we're on a B450 here. So there's actually lots of good options for upgrades if he decides to do that. And he has a 650 watt PSU. Oh man, I set this guy up. Next up, I tested Horizon Zero Dawn. We're running at high settings with quality FSR, and I ended up getting an average of 53 FPS. The 1% lows weren't great, down to 30 FPS, 1% lows, and the CPU usage was a bit higher. I don't think it's the CPU's fault though. Yeah, I had some stutters at the start, but they kind of smoothed out at the end, so it might have been a texture caching issue or something. This is my first time running this game on this system, so it could very well have been something related to that. I don't know. Even still, it's totally playable, totally enjoyable with these settings. Yeah, I don't think you can argue that playing games that look like this at these FPS on a $360 new computer, that's pretty cool. I didn't bother figuring out how to get MSI Afterburner working with CSGO, so I'll just do the Steam FPS counter thing. And I estimate that I got around 180 FPS on average. You know, I really should have figured out the overlay thing now that I think of it, because in hindsight, the more interesting metrics would be the CPU versus the GPU usage here. I think that we're actually CPU bound. This is only 1080p with the lowest settings, so the GPU isn't doing a ton of extra work or anything. And when I used this RX 580 paired with the i5 10400, it got around 270 FPS. So yeah, I'm gonna say that the Ryzen 5 4500 is definitely holding us back here. Maybe it's that 8 megabytes of L3 cache. You know, I know that could come into play in high refresh rate scenarios. Now, this obviously only matters if you're going for super high refresh rates, like 240 Hertz or above. Then maybe this sort of CPU isn't gonna fit your needs at those refresh rates. But again, there might be something else going on here. If I did the proper overlay thing, I might have had a better answer for this. I'm terrible at my job, sorry. And finally, on to the star of the show, Elden Ring. This is the game that my buddy wanted the PC for in the first place. I'm sure he'll be playing other games, but this was his main must-have game. This was the bar. Now, I'm playing it here at 1080p with the high settings. We got 52 FPS on average, with 40 FPS 1% lows. Now, I know for a fact that my buddy is going to be playing this with a controller, so I think that's a great FPS. This game has a 60 FPS cap, so you want to try to get as close to that as possible, and maybe if we lowered a few of the settings down to medium, we would reach that. But honestly, this is how I'd play if I had this PC and I was playing with a controller. I didn't test this on my other PC when I tested this GPU, but I can tell from the CPU utilization that the CPU is not going to be our bottleneck here. So again, if my buddy wants to upgrade down the line, it's an easy swap. If he finds a used, I don't know, RX 6600 XT or something, that would make for a solid upgrade. He'd need some sort of an upgrade if he planned on playing this at 4K. The RX 580 is doing pretty good considering the price, but it's by no means equipped to handle 4K gaming. But I'm pretty sure he's going to be playing this on a monitor with a controller, and at these settings with this setup, that'll be an amazing experience. And that's it. That's all the benchmarks I had time to do. Gotta get this closed up, get it packaged up, off to my buddy. I really hope he likes this PC, and I hope he likes orange. I didn't think about that, but that would certainly be a bummer if you didn't like orange things. But come on, who doesn't like orange? If you don't, then that's a you problem. Orange is objectively amazing. It's not even debatable. But I'm very happy with the way this turned out, all things considered. Yeah, I love the fact that even with all the crazy inflation and the chip shortages and all that, we could still build these amazing gaming PCs on a tight budget, even using all new parts. Please let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this thing? Are you into the orange vibe? What about the performance or the parts that I used? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one and suggestions for future builds in the comments below. And while you're down there, click the thumbs up button if you like the video. Or don't if you didn't. Stop by my Discord server if you do that sort of thing. There's a bunch of fun TechDweebs over there to nerd out with. That's it for me. I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.